This may seem a strange place to begin a journey along the Lagan Canal, but here this road has a name that will be forever symbolical with the canal: Mollyward. This is a view of Mollyward's Lock taken around 1924, with the fully laden barges awaiting their turn to transport their cargo upstream to Lisburn and beyond. All that remains now are the two bollards and the stone edging around the lock. With the lock in a decayed state, and the unlikelihood of the canal being resurrected, the chamber was backfilled in the 1960s. Where the canal was is now a car park and a pleasant garden area. Molly's cottage is no more, and the boathouse, which was built in 1889, was destroyed by a terrorist bomb in 1972. At the weir, the river joins the canal for the barge's journey to Lisburn, and ahead of us is lock number 2, Moorlands Meadow. Moorlands Meadow is in fact an island bounded by the river and canal. At this end we have the remains of the lock with an abandoned stretch of canal, while at the other is where the lock house was built. The house, the foundations of which can still be seen, was known as Mickey Taylor's after a former lockkeeper. Close by the house were floodgates. The slots can still be seen in the stonework. Weirs were a very essential part of the canal. They were used to control the depth of water and maintain the required depth of water for the safe passage of the barge. On the left-hand side of the towpath we have the woodlands of Beaver Park Estate. Sadly, the house was vandalised and had to be demolished by the army back in the 1960s. During the 1939-45 war, the estate was the site of a large Admiralty ammunition dump. The supplies were brought upstream by barge from Belfast and were unloaded at this small wharf. Leaving behind Moorlands Meadow and Beaver Park, we now continue towards the Red Bridge. Alterations were necessary to the Red Bridge when the New Forge Company purchased from the Ulster Fireclay Company at Coal Island the motorised barge Ida. The change to the structure entailed raising the piers to allow headroom to accommodate the barge. Ahead of us is lock number 3, known as McCleaves. At McCleaves, the towpath crossed the canal by means of a charming stone bridge. Close by we see the original lock house and the lock. And from the lock we have a view of the forlorn state of the canal. From here the canal joins the river and Shaw's Bridge is soon reached. The original Shaw's Bridge was a wooden structure built in 1655 by Captain Shaw, who was a serving officer in the army of Cromwell. Cromwell used the bridge to transport his troops and artillery across the river during the Civil War. It was replaced with a stone bridge in 1689, but a number of years later it was destroyed by flooding. The bridge was rebuilt in 1709, additional stones being taken from Castle Carn, which stood to the left of Malone House. And so, after 285 years, the bridge still stands to this day. At Shaw's Bridge, the towpath once more reverts to the right-hand side of the canal. Looking towards Derry, we pass by the Barnes Park estate, now owned by the Belfast City Council, and are joined by the Purtisburn River as it flows from Lisburn. The village of Derry was once a prosperous linen neighbourhood, but sadly is no more. The mill, with its rebuilt chimney, still stands along with the rows of little red brick houses. At this point the canal bears to the right and the loch comes into view. It was known as Norwoods. The lock house was in the grounds of the Ballydrain estate and also looked after the Ballydrain loch. It was demolished some years ago. The only remains left are these two metal rails which formed a footbridge across a stream leading to the house. In the loch can still be seen the remains of the lock gates, with the gate arms lying at the side of the towpath. We leave Derry and travel on towards Loch number 5. We are bounded on the right by the Ballydrain estate, which is now the property of the Malone Golf Club. As you see, the canal in this area is in a desolate state. Just a short journey will now bring us to the Ballydrain Loch. Behind these bushes we find the old lock gates lying in a decayed state. Leaving Ballydrain, we now head towards the drum. Just before reaching the drum, we pass under a small bridge called the Chimney Bridge. This was used for the passage of cattle to the island. On the bridge, you can still see the grooves made by the tow rope. A short walk will bring us to the drum, with the spire of the Drumbeg Parish Church and the drum house on our left-hand side. Drumbridge is the 6th loch in a series of 12 on our journey to Lisburn, the last keeper here being Matthew Irvine. Here there were 2 lock houses, the original being in the Wilmot estate, which was the subject of a court case between the Lagan Navigation Company and the Wilmot estate. The Navigation Company lost the case and had to relinquish the lock house. The lock keeper moved across the road to little whitewashed cottage close by the lock. All that can be seen now are a few bricks that formed the lock house. Still on the parapet are the pulleys used to assist in pulling the bars from the lock. Grooves can also be seen in the stonework. 1 year after start of work on the canal, a 6-mile channel extended upstream from Stanmillis. 4 locks, 4 houses and 2 bridges had been built, and a towpath had been constructed as far as the drum. Under the bridge can still be seen the names of 2 lightermen, S. Hannah, 1946, and T. Gorman, 1951. Upstream from the drum, the canal leaves the river and continues on to lock number 7. This lock was known as Mossvale after the Charlie Mill, but it was better known as McQuiston's Lock. Walking over this little stone bridge, we find the lock house now, sadly, in a ruinous state. Within sight of the lock, we see a blight on the canal, the M1 motorway, which effectively blocks the canal and ensures the canal will never function again. And just ahead is another bridge which was an approach to Seymour Hill and Mossvale houses. And, as we round the next bend, we see the entrance to lock number 8, the High Bridge. John Miles was the last lock keeper employed there. As well as weirs, locks played an important part in the canal working. Between Stanmillis and Lisburn, there was a height difference of 90 feet. And to overcome this, locks were introduced. The bars would enter the lock and the gates would be closed. The top racks were opened and the chamber would flood. When the bars had risen to the level of the ongoing canal, the outgoing gates would be opened and the barge could continue on its way. Overlooking the lock is the keeper's house perched atop of the hill at the rear of Nevins Row, which was restored in 1993. An interesting find was the remains of a small boat in a cutting at the side of the lock. Looking towards the bridge, we can see the grooves in the stonework made by the tow rope, with the protection bars added later, and the workers' names etched in concrete during repairs in the 1930s. S. Simpson, W. Clinton, J. McGarry and M. Martin. Leaving the High Bridge, we continue on towards Lambay. Here we pass a structure built in 1913 by the Lambay Green and known as McMurray's Folly, after the owner of the bleach green. Why it was built or what it was used for is not known, but it's thought it may have housed sluice gates to obtain water from the canal and divert it into the mill race. This was 12 years before the court case against the navigation company. The buildings ahead are the Coca-Cola Bottlers Limited. They were at one time the property of the Lambay Green. Here we can still see the stonework of the Green's coal quay and its wooden bullet for securing the barge to, with a rail on the wall to secure the horse. In 1925 there was a long-standing difference between the Navigation Company and the Lambeg Green, which was settled in the House of Lords. The dispute was over the raising of number 8 lock gates and walls to maintain a depth of 5 foot 6 inches. The Green rejected this proposal on the grounds that it would cause flooding on their lands and would also found their dams and filters. After 5 days' debate, the result was given on behalf of the Navigation Company. Prior to reaching this lock, we can see the rope marks on the brickwork as the barge proceeded towards the lock. The lock house for Lambeg Lock was situated on a small hill just to the left of the lock. Leaving Lambeg, we now head to lock number 10, Hilden. On our right hand side we pass Glenmore House, the home of the Richardson family. Credit must be given to the simplicity of water transport when you think that a barge 60 feet in length, 14 feet in width and 8 feet deep, carrying a cargo of up to 80 tons, pulled by a single horse, the haulier, steered by the lighterman, with no pollution. Continuing on, we approach a sweeping bend known as Hunter's Corner, named after a former bleacher and forerunner of the Glenmore Mill. Here there were 2 quays for the unloading of coal, etc. Departing Hunter's Corner, we move towards the remains of a footbridge provided for the workers of Glenmore Mill, arriving from the County Down side of the canal. Prior to reaching the lock, the horse and haulier would have left the towpath here to follow this pathway onto the bridge. After passing onto the bridge, the horse and haulier would have emerged at this point. This meant that the tow rope had not to be disconnected from the barge, and therefore the entry to the lock would not be impeded. Problems occurred when a road bridge appeared with no pathway underneath. To get around this, the tow rope had to be disconnected and the bargee had to literally pull the barge onto the bridge. Pull it like pulling a punt. That itself was a tremendous task when you think that there may have been materials on board weighing up to 60 to 80 tons. Like most other things, locks required repairs. This photograph was taken around the early 1900s and show workers repairing lock gates. In contrast, this photograph shows a lock being built. Some of the systems in lock building were tremendous feats of engineering. When you remember, there were no giant earth-moving equipment, no reinforced concrete, and no huge lorries to remove the earth. It was a tremendous feat of engineering and skill, and a test of the people's strength and stamina. The lock house for number 10 Bradley's was demolished in the 1980s. Crossing the road, we move towards Barber's Mill. Here we have the original wall of the coal quay still standing, with the rings for tying the barges to still attached. Scenes like these have been typical on the canal for the past 200 years. There has always been the same broad towpath beaten flat by the horses' hooves as they hauled the heavily laden barges along at a steady, gentle pace. Horses have pulled barges since the first barges came into operation. Occasionally mules were used instead, and there were also a few sailing barges, but horses were the main source of power for the canal boats. At this lock, lock number 11, McAllis, the house was removed a few years ago. Near the end of our journey, and about 1 mile upstream, we will arrive at the 12th lock. The 12th lock was situated in Canal Street, close by the Island Mill. Sadly, the lock house, lock and mill are no more. The lock at present is being excavated along with the stonework of the canal. After our journey of some 12 miles or more, we finally arrived at the Union Bridge. This section of the canal was completed and opened in 1763. Following this, there would be an extension of the canal, bringing with it an additional 15 locks and making the overall length of the canal 27 miles. In 1954, the Lagan Navigation Company went into liquidation. It was taken over by the then Ministry of Commerce. Also in 1954, the last barge of the coal arrived at the Island Mill coal quay. And so, finally, in 1958, the canal closed to traffic.